Welcome. Welcome to the second session on modular training on immunization practices. Myself Dr. Uddhav Kumar and we are going to discuss about basic of immunology in this session. Immunology as such is a very complex process. I have tried to simplify it and we are going to discuss about immunology or immunity in this particular session pertaining to vaccination. We know no vaccination can be considered complete unless there is adequate development of immunity. So seroconversion is the mainstay, and unless there is a proper antibody titer developed after vaccination, no vaccination can be considered complete. So let us begin this session. Our body attacks to any foreign body, be it a living or non-living. We call it pathogen here onwards. When any pathogen enters our body treats it as a intruder and attacks it. Our body is equipped with various types of cells. White blood cells are also subdivided into various types of cells like lymphocytes, neutrophils, dendritic cells, and other armory, and they protect ourselves from these intruders. Also, we are having armory of lymphocytes in the form of B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes, which has a capability of keeping the attack in memory, and when similar kind of attack is there in future, they attack even more aggressively and try to control the disease. So let us see introduction of immunity. So basically immunity is a capacity of our body to resist harmful microbes from entering in the body. The immunity involves both specific as well as non-specific components. We will understand about specific and non-specific components in next few slides. Non-specific components act either as barrier or as eliminators of the wide range of pathogen irrespective of antigen specificity. So basically the non-specific component of immunity is the function of innate immunity, and innate immunity we are going to discuss in brief about it in next slide. So innate immunity basically gives non-specific immunity. It is like the we can take example of a loyal dog which will attack any intruder, be it a lion or be it a cat. So irrespective of the nature of the pathogen, our body will attack immediately with the intruder, and that immunity is called innate immunity or non-specific immunity. Whereas specific component of immune system is the work of specific or adaptive immunity, and the response is specific. And as we have to give the specific response, we know for getting the specific response, the time gap will definitely will be there. So in this particular slide, it will be clear to you about the immunity. Immunity, basically there are two basic types of immunity. One is innate immunity and adaptive immunity. We are going to discuss about adaptive immunity in detail in this session, but we must first understand about innate immunity first. So innate immunity, the word innate is actually derived from the two words, which is in means inside body and nate means since birth. So basically innate immunity is present in our body since birth, and it protects ourselves from any pathogen entering in the body. So innate immunity starts from the skin, which acts as the barrier, and it is the main barrier for any pathogen to enter inside the body. But once that pathogen is entered in the body, like previously discussed, like a loyal dog, it will try to attack the foreign body, foreign pathogens, and try to protect ourselves from any harm caused due to that pathogen. Whereas the adaptive immunity, it is again subdivided into two types. One is natural and another is artificial. Natural adaptive immunity again can be classified into passive and active component. So passive immunity in natural immunity is developed, or the individual gets that due to maternal antibody. So many maternal antibodies which are present in the human body after birth will protect against various diseases in the initial stages of life. And if the antibodies are not in sufficient quantity or some antibodies are not there will be infection also to that particular newborn, and that infection will give immunity, also give immunity, but that immunity will be labeled active because body is actively trying to defend that particular infection, and that will be labeled as active immunity in natural immunity. Whereas artificial immunity is again subdivided into passive as well as active component. So passive component is nothing but the direct antibody titer transfer. There are some incidences or cases where we cannot wait for natural immunity to develop after vaccination. Like in the needle stick injury due to hepatitis B, we have to directly give the antibodies to the individual, so that because we should know that vaccination cannot work if there is already infection. So vaccination only will be effective when there is no infection with that particular pathogen earlier. So if when there is infection and before development of that particular disease, we have to give antibody. So when there is needle stick injury, we have to protect ourselves from that antigens, and passively ready-made antibodies are given to that individual, and that will give immunity for some duration of a time, that is called as passive immunity. At the same time, the vaccine will be given to that individual at different site, and that will start the natural immunity, and that natural immunity is of course superior to passive immunity. So immunity basically is divided into innate, that is since birth immunity, and adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity is again subdivided into natural and artificial. Natural is due to maternal antibodies or the recent or earlier infection in childhood, whereas artificial immunity in adaptive immunity is due to passive transfer of ready-made antibodies or the vaccination or the vaccine given. So in this particular modular training, we are more going to deal with, or we should understand about this artificial immunity, which will work in development or seroconversion of any antibodies. So let us discuss difference between innate immunity and adaptive immunity. I hope that the difference between innate immunity and adaptive immunity is clear to you all. Innate immunity is basically since birth immunity, and it is irrespective, or it is non-specific. It is like defense mechanism which will treat any intruder alike, and it will try to protect our body from the infection. Whereas adaptive immunity will be specific, and it will first check the infection, how the infection is there, how serious it is, and how the steps should be taken to take to control that particular infection. That's why the adaptive immunity will take some time to develop. Innate immunity response is antigen independent. So like I already told to you, it is non-specific. It will treat all the intruders or pathogens alike. Means whatever comes inside body, it will attack that particular antigen and try to protect ourselves. Whereas adaptive immunity is antigen dependent. Innate immunity response is immediate. Immediately when pathogen is entering in the body, it will attack and try to protect ourselves, whereas adaptive immunity will require some time to identify the pathogen. Innate immunity is not antigen specific, whereas adaptive immunity is antigen specific and it depends on the prior stimulation of the innate immune response. So if the similar response has been experienced in previous infection, then our body will have memory cells, and it will act aggressively with that to that particular infection. Whereas in innate immunity, there is no role of memory cells. That's why all response will be similar. Okay, innate immunity works with the armory of epithelial cells, phagocytosis, dendritic cells, mast cells, and so on. Whereas adaptive immunity works with the help of lymphocytes. Innate immunity exposure does not result in induction of memory cells, as already been told to you, but in adaptive immunity, exposure results in induction of memory cells. Some of its cellular components of their products aid in specific immunity. Even in innate immunity, there could be some kind of specific immunity to some type of pathogens. Whereas in adaptive immunity, like exception, there will be some non-specific immunity also will be developed in that particular individual. Now let us discuss about the immune response. Immune response is either antigen T-dependent response or T-independent response. T-dependent response is always preferred. We should know when there is pathogen entering in our body, there is production of antibodies, which we call it as the humoral immunity. And T lymphocytes are responsible for development of cellular or cell mediated immunity. T dependent response is always preferred because it is robust and long standing, because it will tell the B lymphocytes for induction of memory cells, and due to the induction of memory cells the response will be long standing, and the next or new infection or the repeated infection will be dealt aggressively and we can protect ourselves from the infection. Whereas T independent response, which is also present, but it stimulates B lymphocytes to produce antibody without the help of T lymphocytes. That's why the response is short-lived, and it is in being independent of memory cells. It has a limited advantage. That means in for future infection, it will not be very helpful. Now, humoral response is actually the primary response of our body, and it is responsible for production of antibodies. It has a longer lag time. That means from the infection to development of immunity, it will have some time. It will require some time to develop. It has slow rise in antibody level, and it will have lower plateau. It will be clear to you in next slide where we are having the graphical presentation of this particular response. So humoral response, which is initial response, it will be specific, but as it will be specific, it will require some time to take some action. It will have slow rise of antibody levels, it will have lower plateau, and it will have quick decline. But whereas secondary response, it is due to re-exposure, and as we are having memory cells, the response will be quick. It will be accelerated response, not unlike the primary response, because we already are trained. So it will have shorter lag period. It will have higher plateau, obviously, because antibodies will be formed aggressively, and more antibodies will be there, so response will last long. Now, here you can see in this particular graph, the initial response it will take some time to develop and protect ourselves from the infection, but the antibody titer will be in fewer in number, and it will last for small short duration, so plateau will be short. But second exposure, as there is memory cell, the response is accelerated and lag is not that much. Immediately the response will be there, antibodies titer will rise, and it will sustain for longer duration. That's why second exposure in the form of booster dose is important. We must have heard about the booster doses required for COVID vaccination, because we are using vaccine, and we could not get the ample time to study the response of the antibodies after the booster. So whenever we are seeing the decline in the sufficient quantities of antibodies, we are introducing booster, and booster response is always accelerated, and it is protecting ourselves from the body, from the infection. So this is regarding the basic of immunology. I will quickly summarize the basic of immunology. So basically, immunology or immunity is divided into two parts, that is innate means since birth, and adaptive immunity. Innate immunity is the immunity which deals with the all pathogens alike and will treat it as the pathogen, and the response will be same. It will not understand it is lion or cat. It will try to attack it and protect ourselves from the infection. Whereas adaptive immunity will try to gauge the infection, try to identify the infection, and according to that understanding, then there will be response. So adaptive immunity will have, it is a specific response. It will take some steps and specifically it will deal with the infection. And as it is specific, it will also have capability to have some memory for that particular infection. So whenever the similar type of infection is there, innate immunity will attack as such immediately, but now second infection, adaptive immunity will play major role and aggressive accelerated antibody response will be there and we can protect ourselves. So vaccination, when first dose is given, it is initial exposure, so antibody titer will be there, but the booster dose will increase the titer aggressively and more immunity will be developed. So with this, we will end this session. And if you are having any queries or doubt, please feel free to contact us. Thank you.